enduring what many would deem impossible. That's my legacy. Perhaps you believe your early years were challenging. Now envision maturing without paternal guidance, alongside a stepfather whose daily mission involved reminding me of my worthlessness. Compounding this domestic torment, I faced relentless mockery from classmates who treated my very existence as questionable. Throughout those formative years, I felt utterly transparent. My desperate pleas for assistance remained perpetually muted, regardless of how frantically I attempted to vocalize them. I'm Emily, and this narrative chronicles my triumph over seemingly insurmountable adversity. For countless seasons, I believed myself permanently trapped within an inescapable cycle of suffering. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Today, I stand before you as living testimony that circumstances can transform dramatically. To anyone listening to my words now, please understand you aren't facing your struggles in isolation. My childhood unfolded in a modest apartment nestled in Chicago's outskirts, where my father's devotion remained the one unfailing constant. He represented my sanctuary, my personal champion. Regardless of whatever hardships each day presented, he invariably returned with warmth and tenderness for both my mother and me. I treasured those moments perched upon his knee while he wove bedtime tales. My mother would often observe with amusement that I was Daddy's little shadow. I aspired to embody his qualities, his strength, compassion, and unwavering willingness to assist others. Yet life never inquires whether we're prepared to relinquish those we cherish most deeply. That particular day remains permanently etched in my consciousness, like an indelible mark that time cannot diminish. I can still recall with perfect clarity the aroma of freshly brewed coffee my mother was preparing, the subdued sounds emanating from our Netflix selection, and the resonant sound of my father's laughter.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
I was drawing in the living room when I heard a different sound. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a crash. It was something more subtle, but equally frightening. A deep sigh followed by a silence that had never happened in that house before. When I looked back, I saw my father holding his chest, trying to say something. My eyes met his, and for a moment I saw fear. I had never seen my father afraid before. My mother ran to him. I was paralyzed. The following minutes were a blur. My mother calling for help, the neighbors arriving, the sirens. I remember holding his hand on the living room floor, as if somehow that could stop what was happening. He squeezed my fingers lightly, as if wanting to tell me something, but I never found out what it was. He never came home again. My father's death didn't just take him away. It also took away my mother's spark. She was never the same. The woman who once sang while washing dishes now spent hours staring into nothingness. She tried to hide her tears, but I saw them. I always saw them. People said time healed everything, but for us, time only seemed to make things worse. His absence was a hole that nothing could fill. Money began to run short, bills piled up, and little by little my mother became a shadow of her former self. She tried to find a job but couldn't keep one for long. Some nights I heard her crying in her room, asking God to fix our lives. And then one day, he appeared. My mother met him at Walmart. He offered to carry her bags and, according to her, was kind and polite. She always said life wasn't easy for a single woman and that maybe it was time to move on. At first, he seemed perfect. He brought roses for my mother, paid compliments, called me his little one, said that now we had someone to take care of us. My mother started smiling again, and I tried to like him. I swear I tried. But there was something about him that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't say exactly what, but when he hugged me, I felt like running away. When he spoke to me, his tone was always sweet, but his eyes made me feel small. I tried to tell my mother once, but she smiled and said, "You're just jealous, sweetheart. He only wants what's best for us." From that day on, I learned to keep my words to myself. That's how the man who seemed to be the solution to our lives became our worst nightmare. My mother married him a few months later, and the first thing that changed was our home. Before, my mother made all the decisions, but now everything went through him. He chose what we would eat, where we could go, what we could do. At first, it seemed normal. He said he wanted the best for us, but I soon realized my opinion didn't matter. My mother, who was once my confidant, was now always on his side. I felt that my home was no longer mine. Small things began to bother me. The way he looked at me for too long, how he would stand at my bedroom door for no reason, how he called me beautiful in a way that gave me chills, and not in a good way. One day my mother left for work and he stayed alone with me. He called me to sit on the couch with him. My skin crawled. Something inside me screamed that I shouldn't go. "Come on, Emily. You don't need to be afraid of me," he said, smiling. And it was then that I realized I was afraid of him. When you're a child, home should be the safest place in the world. Home is where we should find comfort, affection, protection. But for me, my own home became my worst nightmare. And the worst part? I had nowhere to run. After that day on the couch, I began to notice things I had tried to ignore before, small details that, when seen alone, might just be coincidences, but together painted a truth I didn't want to accept. My stepfather always found a way to be nearby. If I was in the kitchen, he appeared. If I went to the bathroom, he passed by the door. If I went to my room, minutes later, he was around. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Maybe I was exaggerating, as my mother said. But the feeling of alertness never went away. Whenever he was nearby, my skin crawled, my heart raced, and I felt the urge to run. I remember one night in particular. My mother had gone to bed early, tired from work. I stayed in the living room watching Netflix, trying to enjoy a moment of peace. He sat on the couch across the room. "It's late, Emily," he said without taking his eyes off me. "Your mother is already asleep." I just nodded without saying anything. "Aren't you going to come say goodnight to me?" I felt a lump in my throat. He was smiling, but something in his expression was disturbing. "Good night," I murmured without moving. His eyes remained fixed on me for too long. Then he got up and walked toward the hallway, but before disappearing from my sight, he whispered, "Don't forget to lock your bedroom door." My entire body froze. I ran to my room, closed the door, and turned the key. I lay in bed, but remained motionless, unable to sleep. I stayed there looking at the door, expecting the doorknob to move, for footsteps to appear in the hallway, for the worst to happen. And that night, for the first time, I realized that my own home was the most dangerous place for me. The following days were a game of silent resistance. I avoided being alone with him at all costs. If my mother was home, I stuck to her. If he entered a room, I left. But whenever he looked at me, I knew he was waiting for an opportunity. Little by little, he began to make sure to show who was in charge in that house. "This isn't a hotel," he would say when I took too long in the shower. "I'm the man of the house, so you have to respect me." If I left something out of place, I got scolded. If I took too long to answer when he called, I was punished. My mother saw everything but never said anything. She tried to keep the peace, as if she were between two worlds. On one side, the husband she loved, on the other, the daughter who had always been with her. But in the end, she chose him. That's when I realized I was alone. I knew I needed to tell someone, but who? My mother had made it clear she wouldn't believe me, and I had no one else. Until one day, my teacher asked me to stay after class to talk. "Emily, is everything okay?" she asked while closing a book. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I answered, looking at the desk. "Are you sure? You've been so quiet lately." It was my chance. My hands were sweating. My heart was pounding. I don't like my stepfather," I almost whispered. She frowned. "What do you mean?" He's not nice to me. And he scares me." There was silence. She looked at me for a few seconds, then smiled, trying to seem cool. "Oh, my dear, stepfathers can be difficult at first, but your mother loves you. I'm sure everything will work out." My chest sank. "But You're a strong girl, Emily," she said, interrupting. "These things pass." At that moment, I understood. No matter how loud I screamed, no one would listen. After that, I gave up. I closed myself off in my own world. At school, I barely spoke. If someone tried to start a conversation, I would just nod or give short answers. I began to walk looking at the ground as if I wanted to disappear, but disappearing wasn't an option. And then came the second part of my nightmare. If my home was no longer safe, school would soon become a place of pain, too. At first, I only suffered from subtle comments. "Look, there's the weird orphan. Don't get close to her, or your dad might disappear, too. Wow, she eats like a pig. No wonder she's that size." Each word was like a stab wound. The worst part? The teachers heard. They knew. But no one did anything. They just looked and pretended they didn't hear. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that it would soon stop. But it didn't stop. On the contrary, it got worse. One day we were in gym class. I hated this class because I was always picked last for teams. This time, when only I was left, one of the boys laughed, "Oh no, the whale again." Everyone laughed. I looked at the teacher, hoping she would say something, but she just looked the other way. At that moment, I felt that my existence was a joke to everyone there. And for the first time, I began to think that maybe it would be better if I weren't there. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. My stepfather became increasingly controlling. He watched me all the time. At school, I was humiliated every day. I had no friends, no one to defend me. And then one night, as I looked out my bedroom window, I wondered, would it make a difference if I disappeared? It was the first time this thought crossed my mind, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. I no longer knew who I was. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that if I became invisible, maybe things would get better. Maybe if I didn't bother anyone, if I shrank and kept quiet, my stepfather would forget about me. Maybe the kids at school wouldn't notice me. Maybe the pain would go away. The pain never went away. It grew day by day, like a shadow following me wherever I went. What was once a passing fear became a constant terror. I slept little. When I did sleep, I had nightmares, always the same ones. I dreamed that my mother left me behind, that my stepfather laughed while I cried, that the entire school watched me while pointing fingers at me. The worst part was waking up and realizing my nightmare didn't end when I opened my eyes. One night, when my mother had gone to work late, my stepfather stayed alone with me. I knew I had nowhere to run, so I did what I always did. I locked myself in my room and prayed he would forget about me. But that night, he didn't forget. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, the sound of his socks dragging on the floor. My heart raced. The doorknob moved. I curled up in bed, holding the comforter tightly. "Emily?" he called with that drawling voice, almost a whisper. "Emily." I remained silent. He turned the doorknob, trying to open the door. "Did you hear me? Open up." I held my breath. He pushed the door. The wood creaked, but didn't open. "You think a lock can protect you from me?" My entire body trembled. After a while, the footsteps disappeared down the hallway. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I got up with swollen eyes. I hadn't slept, but I couldn't miss school because if I stayed home, I would be alone with him. Even knowing what awaited me, I preferred to face the hell of school than that man. As soon as I arrived, I noticed the looks, the low laughs. I walked down the hallway and heard a group whispering, "She looks like a zombie. Look at her clothes. Looks like she slept in the trash." I swallowed the pain and kept walking, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, something within me was breaking a little more each day. In class, the teacher asked everyone to do group work. As always, I was the last to be chosen. "Who wants the whale in their group?" one of the boys asked, laughing. The entire class burst into laughter. The teacher heard it. She looked, but pretended nothing had happened. It was at that moment I realized I had nowhere to run. My home was hell. My school was hell. My life was hell. And I began to wonder, will this ever end? That same day, during recess, I went to the bathroom to breathe a bit. I looked in the mirror, my eyes were sunken, my skin was pale. I didn't look like a child, I looked like a ghost. That's when the door opened forcefully. It was 3 girls, the most popular ones in school. "Look who's here," one of them said, crossing her arms. "The poor little thing." They approached. My heart raced. "Do you think anyone here likes you?" another asked. "Do you think anyone feels sorry for you?" I remained silent. "Because I'll tell you a secret." She leaned close to my face. "Nobody cares about you. Nobody misses you. Nobody cares what happens to you. If you disappeared, nobody would notice." I stood there, unable to react. They left laughing, leaving their words echoing in my mind. And for the first time, I thought, maybe they're right. That night, I came home and went straight to my room. I sat on the bed, looking out the window. I wanted the pain to stop. I wanted the fear to stop. I wanted to disappear. And then for the first time, I thought of doing something extreme, something that should never have crossed my mind. I got up, went to the window, and looked outside. What if I simply ceased to exist? My heart was pounding. My hands were trembling. Maybe it would be better this way. Maybe it was the only way out. And then I heard a knock on the door. My mother entered. She looked tired, but looked at me with a concerned expression. "Are you okay, Emily?" I swallowed hard. I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask for help. But I just nodded. "Just tired." She approached, ran her hand through my hair. "I know things are difficult," she said, sighing, "but everything will get better." I didn't believe her, but at that moment her touch held me. That night I fell asleep crying, but I was alive. And that day, without knowing it, I had taken the first step toward my salvation. After that night, something changed inside me. I still felt fear, I still felt pain, but now I knew one thing. I was alone. No one would come to save me. Not my mother, not the school, not the teachers. I couldn't count on anyone. And if no one cared about me, then I didn't need to care either. That's how I began to close myself off even more. If before I walked with my head down, now I didn't even try to look at others. If before I still made an effort to participate in classes, now I just sat quietly, waiting for time to pass.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
But no matter how much I tried to disappear, people's cruelty always found me. It was on a fall day that she arrived. I remember it well because it was one of those days when the wind cut through your skin. Dry leaves flew across the schoolyard and students ran into the classrooms, escaping the cold. In my class, the whispers began before class even started. "I heard there's a new student today. They say she came from another city. I hope she's pretty, at least." The boys laughed. The girls whispered among themselves, and then the teacher entered, bringing a girl beside her. "Everyone, this is Amber. She just moved here and will be studying with you from today. I hope you welcome her well." She looked ordinary, dark hair, fair skin, brown eyes that avoided contact. But there was something about her that caught my attention. The way she held her backpack strapped tightly, the look that tried to be confident but hid a certain apprehension, the timid smile that lasted only a second before disappearing. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had suffered. During recess, as usual, I sat in the most remote corner of the yard with my lunchbox on my lap. That's when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked to the side and saw Amber standing there, holding her own lunchbox. "Can I sit here?" she asked. I was surprised. No one ever asked to sit with me. I nodded without saying anything. She sat beside me and remained silent for a few seconds, fidgeting with her lunch. "I don't like being in the middle of the yard," she said without looking at me. "Too many people." I don't respond. She sighed and looked at me. "Aren't you going to ask where I'm from?" I shrugged. "No one ever asks where I'm from either." She laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't so alone after all. As the days passed, Amber began to get closer to me. She didn't seem to care that I was the weird girl at school. On the contrary, whenever she could, she sat with me, started conversations, asked questions, and little by little, I began to talk. Not much, just short answers, but for someone who had spent years trying to be invisible, that was already a big step. One day, while we were sitting in the shade of a tree, she asked, "Why do you always stay alone?" I swallowed hard. "Because it's easier that way." She frowned. "Easier? How so?" I looked ahead, not brave enough to face her. "When you're alone, no one can hurt you." There was silence. When I looked to the side, I saw she was watching me with a sad look. "I used to think the same thing," she whispered. My chest tightened. "Used to?" She sighed and looked at the sky. "I've been through some things too. Bad things." My heart raced. Someone like me? For a second, I wanted to ask, wanted to know, but I couldn't. Amber noticed my hesitation and smiled. But I discovered that being alone doesn't solve anything. It only makes everything worse. I remained silent, absorbing her words, and for the first time I wondered, was I wrong all this time? The friendship between Amber and me began to grow, and of course people began to notice. The whispers started. "Look at the weirdo. She got a friend." I bet the new girl has some problem too. I was used to it, but Amber wasn't. And it was on one of those days that something happened. We were in gym class. As always, I was the last to be chosen. But this time, before anyone could say anything, Amber took my hand and said, "If she's not on the team, I won't play either." Silence. The students looked at each other, confused. "What?" one of the boys mocked. "You're going to refuse to play just because of her?" She crossed her arms. "Yes." The teacher looked on, not knowing what to do. "Amber, that's not fair," she said. "You do this to Emily every day, and the teachers pretend not to see." My heart was pounding. No one had ever done this for me. No one had ever stood by my side. In the end, the teacher gave in, and that day, for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be treated with respect. Having a friend changed something inside me. For years, I had gotten used to being invisible, to accepting that I would never have someone by my side. But Amber appeared and slowly began to show me that the world didn't have to be so lonely. But even with her friendship, my fear still existed. My stepfather was still at home. My classmates still despised me. And deep down, I thought nothing would really change. Until the day I was forced to choose between continuing to hide or finally reacting. It was a Friday and my mother would be out for a work dinner. This meant I would be alone with him, and I knew he had been waiting for this moment. Since early on, I noticed his gaze was different. He watched me more intensely, like a predator waiting for the right moment to attack. After my mother left, I went straight to my room and locked the door. But after a few minutes, I heard his voice on the other side. "Emily, come here." I remained motionless. "I know you're awake." My heart was pounding. "Come on, I just want to talk." I felt my entire body tremble. The doorknob turned. He tried to open the door. "Are you going to disobey me?" My mind screamed for me to do something, anything, but I was paralyzed. "Open it, now!" The silence on the other side of the door made me hold my breath. He was still there. Then I heard his footsteps moving away. I sat there on the floor, trembling, knowing this wasn't over. And it was there that I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to do something. The next day at school, I looked for Amber. I wanted to tell her, but the words wouldn't come out. How to explain something I myself couldn't understand. But Amber noticed. "You're different today," she said. I swallowed. "I'm just tired." She frowned. "Emily, you know you can talk to me, right?" I tried to smile, but I was tired of talking and no one listening. And it was then that Amber did something that changed everything. She held my hand and said, "I believe you." They were just 3 words, but at that moment, they meant everything to me because no one had ever said that before. No one had ever believed in me, and it was there that I understood. If I wanted things to change, I would have to fight for myself. That same day, as we were leaving school, something unexpected happened. The same boys who always humiliated me were at the gate. "Look, there's the fat girl again," they laughed. But for the first time, instead of lowering my head and pretending not to hear, I stopped. I turned slowly. "Say it again." My voice came out firmer than I expected. The boys looked at each other, surprised. "What? Are you going to cry?" I felt Amber beside me, watching me, and then, for the first time, I didn't run away. "Do you think you hurt me?" I asked. "Do you think I care?" They were silent. "I feel sorry for you," I continued, "because only weak people need to hurt others to feel better." The laughter disappeared. For the first time, the boys didn't have an answer. I walked away with my heart racing. My hands were trembling, but for the first time in my life, I felt strong. Amber smiled beside me. "You were amazing," she said. And at that moment, I realized something. I still had fear. I still had scars. I still felt pain. But I was no longer the same girl who hid. I was changing. And this was my first victory. I knew that one day this would have to happen. I couldn't keep pretending I could continue living like this. Since that night when my stepfather tried to open my bedroom door, I felt that time was running against me. Sooner or later, he would try again, and I couldn't wait for the worst anymore. But what could I do if my mother wouldn't listen to me, if teachers pretended not to see, if schoolmates only knew how to hurt me? So, who could save me? That morning, I arrived at school feeling like I was carrying a ton on my shoulders. Fear never left me. My stepfather's face was in my mind all the time. His voice, his look, the way he imposed himself as if showing me I would never have a way out of that house. But Amber's words echoed inside me. "I believe you," and that's why, before class started, I looked for her. She was sitting in the hallway, leafing through a book. When she saw me, she smiled, but when she looked at me closely, her smile disappeared. "What happened?" she asked immediately. I swallowed hard. I wanted to say it, wanted to tell everything, but how to explain a pain that seemed bigger than words could describe? She waited, didn't insist, and then, without thinking too much, I sat beside her and whispered, "I can't go back home." Her eyes widened. "What?" "If I go back, something bad will happen." She was silent but held my hand, and I knew at that instant that she would listen to me, that for the first time someone would truly listen. Amber remained silent for a moment, but her look said everything. She understood. "You need to tell someone," she said, her voice full of urgency. "But who? My mother doesn't listen. The teachers don't care. Nobody cares." "I care." I was speechless. Then, before I could react, she stood up and said, "Come with me." I froze. "Where are we going?" "To talk to the school counselor." My stomach sank. "No, I can't." "Emily, do you want to continue living like this?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, I really thought about it. Did I want to continue living like this? And for the first time, the answer was no. I went with Amber to the counselor's office. He was a middle-aged man, bald, with large glasses, and an always serious expression. When we entered, he looked at us over his glasses. "What is it?" Amber squeezed my hand, encouraging me. "Emily needs help." He frowned. "Help with what?" My throat went dry. Amber looked at me, waiting for me to speak. I took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in my life, I let the words come out. "My stepfather." That was all I could say before breaking down in tears. Amber hugged me, and for the first time, I cried in front of someone without feeling ashamed. The counselor was silent for a moment, but then his voice came firmly. "Tell me everything." And so I did. This time without hiding. This time without fear. The counselor listened attentively without interrupting me. When I finished, he sighed and picked up the phone. "Emily, from today on, you won't be alone anymore." I didn't understand at the moment, but then he dialed a number and began to speak. "Yes, we have a case here. A student reported psychological abuse and threats at home." My heart raced. I knew what was happening. He was calling the police department and Child Protective Services. At the end of the day, my mother was called to the school. She arrived hurriedly, confused, wanting to know why they had called her at work. But when she entered the room and saw my face, something changed in her expression. She realized that this time it was no longer possible to pretend nothing was happening. The counselor explained the situation, told everything I had said. My mother was in shock. "Emily, is this true?" I just nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Her face went white. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny everything as she always did. But this time, she didn't deny it. This time, she listened. And for the first time, I felt I was no longer alone. When we returned home, the atmosphere was heavy. My stepfather was in the living room as if nothing had happened. My mother entered, and he looked at her with a smile. "What's wrong?" he asked, as if he didn't know. But then my mother looked at him with a look I had never seen before, a look of fury, of disgust, of hatred. She didn't say anything, just picked up the phone and called someone. "Come now?" In less than an hour, the police were at our house. He tried to argue, tried to pretend he was innocent, but my mother, who had always defended him before, no longer believed his lies, and that's how he was expelled from our lives forever. My stepfather's arrest didn't erase everything he had done to me. On the day he was taken away, I remember standing at the front door, watching the police put him in the car. He turned one last time and gave me a look that made me tremble from head to toe. Even behind bars, the fear he had planted inside me was still there. And I knew he wasn't the only ghost I would have to face, because now that he was gone, a new challenge arose before me: relearning to live. After everything happened, our house felt strange. The silence was different. It was no longer a silence of fear, but of emptiness, as if something was still hiding in the shadows. My mother seemed like a different person. She cried every night, walking back and forth across the house, murmuring to herself. One day, I heard her saying quietly, "How was I so blind?" I wanted to answer, wanted to say I had tried to speak, tried to scream, tried to show the truth. But I didn't say anything because deep down I knew my mother was also a victim. She blamed herself for not seeing what was happening right before her eyes. But unlike her, I couldn't afford the luxury of staying stuck in the past. I needed to move forward. On the first night without him in the house, I closed my bedroom door and looked at the doorknob. No shadow appeared in the hallway. No whisper came from the other side of the door. No threat surrounded my mind. For the first time in years, I could sleep without holding the comforter tightly, without curling up in bed, without jumping at the slightest noise. But peace didn't come all at once. Nightmares still haunted me. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night feeling he was there, but when I looked around, I realized there was no one. It was just me. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. I thought that after everything, at least at school, things would get better, but I was wrong. Rumors spread quickly. Some said my stepfather was arrested because he was a dangerous criminal. Others invented that my mother had cheated on him and that he had left because of that.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
But the worst wasn't the gossip. The worst was the looks. Before, people despised me. Now they looked at me with pity. I hated that. I didn't want to be the fragile girl, the poor thing. I just wanted to be me. It was then that I realized school wasn't a safe place for me, and if I wanted to change my life, I would need to find another path. A few days later, Amber and I were sitting in the yard. She, as always, was direct. "What are you going to do now?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your life has changed, Emily. You don't have to live in fear anymore. But what are you going to do with this freedom?" I was silent. I had never thought about it. I had spent so much time surviving, trying to escape the worst, that I had never imagined one day I would have a choice about what to do with my life. Amber smiled. "You can be anything." It was the first time I heard those words, and it was at that moment that an idea began to form inside me. Maybe, just maybe, my story could serve a greater purpose. Maybe I could help other people who had gone through what I went through. With the help of the school principal, I began consulting with a social worker. She helped me understand something I had never realized before. I wasn't to blame for what happened to me. I had spent years thinking the problem was me, that I was weak, that I deserved all that. But for the first time, someone told me in no uncertain terms, "You are a survivor, Emily." It was strange to hear this, but it was liberating. Little by little, I began to speak more, began to remove that pain from inside me, and with time, I realized that each time I spoke, a piece of that weight left my shoulders. Months later, the social worker invited me to an event about violence against children and adolescents at the Community Center, Chicago. She asked if I wanted to share my story with other girls. My first instinct was to refuse, but then I remembered what Amber had said. You can be anything. I took a deep breath and accepted. On the day of the event, I climbed onto the small stage and looked at the audience. There were dozens of faces, many of them girls like me. I knew some of them were going through what I had gone through. And then, for the first time, I told my story. I talked about the fear, the pain, the loneliness, the moment I thought there was no way out, and the day everything changed. And when I finished, silence took over the place. But then a girl at the back of the audience began to cry. She ran to me, hugged me, and whispered, "Thank you. You gave me hope." And at that moment, I knew my pain hadn't been in vain. Sharing my story for the first time was like opening a door I didn't even know existed. For years, I had carried my pain as an unbearable weight, a burden that crushed me every day. But at that event, when that girl hugged me and thanked me, I realized something. My story wasn't just mine. There were so many other girls, so many other boys going through what I went through. And if I could help them, if I could be the voice I never had, if I could prevent other children from feeling as alone as I felt. That day, I made a decision. I would never be silent again. If my story had power, then I would use it to change the world. I was still a teenager, but I knew I wanted to do something bigger. I talked to the social worker who helped me and asked what I could do to support children who suffered as I had suffered. She smiled and said, "You're already doing it, Emily. Just by telling your story, you're already changing lives." But I wanted more. That's how I began participating in meetings for young victims of abuse and violence. I heard stories as heavy as mine, some even worse. But for the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt useful. Each time I held someone's hand and said, "I know how you feel," I saw in that person's eyes the same relief I felt when Amber told me, "I believe you." As time passed, my mother began to change too. She still carried the guilt, still cried some nights, pacing around the house. But little by little, she began to understand that she was also a victim of the situation. She began seeking psychological help, getting involved in support groups for women who had lived in abusive relationships. And one day, after a long time, she looked into my eyes and said, "Forgive me, daughter." It was the first time I heard this from her, and for the first time, I knew I could truly forgive her because I saw that she was also trying to rebuild herself. And just like me, she was succeeding. Years later, when I was already a young adult, I received an email. It was from a girl from one of the events where I had shared my story. In the email, she wrote, "I was about to give up on everything, but when I heard you speak, I realized I wasn't alone. You saved me, Emily." I remember holding that email with trembling hands because at that moment, I realized I was no longer the victim of the story. I was the protector. I was the one who gave hope. And for the first time, I felt completely free. That girl's email stayed with me for a long time. I read and reread it, trying to absorb the weight of those words. You saved me, Emily. For so long, I felt that my pain was useless, that all the suffering I lived through only served to destroy me. But at that moment, I realized that every tear, every sleepless night, every fear I faced, all of it brought me here. And now I had a purpose. I didn't just want to tell my story. I wanted to change lives. I never thought about pursuing an academic career. After everything I went through, I thought I wouldn't have a real future. But one day, while talking with the social worker who helped me, she said something that stuck in my mind. "Have you thought about studying to work with children and adolescents?" I was silent. I had never thought about it. "You have a gift, Emily," she continued. "People connect with you because they see truth in what you say. You can go beyond. You can make this your mission." That night, lying in bed, I thought about it, and for the first time, I dreamed about the future. I decided I wanted to study social psychology to be able to officially help children who were victims of abuse. The problem, I wasn't the best student. My years of suffering at school had made me completely distance myself from studies. But now, for the first time, I wanted to learn. I began studying with Amber, who had always been a brilliant student, and little by little, I recovered lost time. At first it was difficult, but each time I thought about giving up, I remembered that email. "You saved me." And I kept going. 4 years later, when I finished my studies, I got an internship at the Chicago Center for Trauma Recovery. The first time I sat in front of a girl who had gone through what I went through, I felt a lump in my throat. She was small, must have been about 12, with sunken eyes, hunched shoulders, the expression of someone who already carried a weight too heavy for her age. When the therapist in charge introduced me, the girl barely looked at me. "She doesn't talk much," the therapist warned me. I took a deep breath and sat beside her. I remained silent for a few minutes, and then gently, I said, "I know." The girl frowned, surprised, and for the first time, raised her eyes to look at me, and I knew at that moment that I was exactly where I should be. I worked for years, helping children and adolescents who had gone through traumas similar to mine. Each story reminded me of a piece of my own pain, but at the same time, each child I helped made me see that my pain was never in vain. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to create something gameti, something that could reach more people. That's when the idea emerged. What if I created a support group, not just for children, but also for mothers, for families who had gone through difficult situations like mine? So I began working on it, and shortly after, my first support organization was born, New Beginnings. The first case we attended to was that of a girl named Sophia. She was 11 years old and suffered violence at home, just as I had suffered. When she came to us, she was scared, insecure, without hope. But something inside me said that, with time, she would be able to heal. She participated in the meetings in silence for weeks, but one day, while everyone was sharing their stories, she raised her hand and for the first time spoke. She cried, and we held her. And at that moment, I knew the cycle was breaking, that finally, my pain was being transformed into something greater. I never imagined I would come so far. When I was a child, all I wanted was to survive. Now, I wasn't just surviving, I was changing lives. My organization started small, just a few meetings with victims and family members. But the need was too great to be ignored. Each week, more people sought our help. More children needed a safe place. More mothers wanted to understand how to protect their children. And that's how my small initiative began to grow and gain strength. One day, a journalist from the Chicago Tribune learned about our work and wanted to do a report about us. I hesitated. The idea of telling my story to an even larger audience scared me. But then I remembered the first time I shared my pain and how it changed my life and saved others. So I accepted. The interview was published in the Chicago Tribune, and to my surprise, we received a flood of messages. Parents asking for help, teachers wanting to learn how to deal with traumatized children, survivors seeking a space to share their stories. My story was echoing, and that was just the beginning. But as with everything in life, not everything was easy. Many people said domestic violence was a family problem, not a society's problem. They said children had to forget and move on. I knew it wasn't that simple. I saw the trauma in the victim's eyes. I knew the weight of living with invisible scars. So I began giving TED Talks in schools, companies, churches, any place that would let me speak. I wanted the world to understand that a child's pain cannot be ignored. And little by little, people began to listen. The transformation of my initiative became evident 4 years into the journey, through an encounter I'll carry with me always. While working at our support facility, I noticed an unfamiliar woman enter, her demeanor exuding both resilience and self-assurance. Only upon meeting her gaze did recognition dawn. This was the same individual who had reached out electronically years earlier with the simple yet profound message, "You saved me, Emily." With quiet determination, she declared, "I'm here because I want to extend the same lifeline to other girls." That declaration crystallized something profound. My mission had expanded beyond my individual experience. It now encompassed our collective struggle, offering renewed possibility to children who had abandoned hope of fresh beginnings. Reflecting on my journey, I've arrived at a crucial understanding. Suffering need not dictate our identity. I spent countless years believing my trajectory was irreversibly determined. I was mistaken. Alternatives always exist. To anyone absorbing my narrative who feels trapped in despair, please hear this truth. You aren't facing your challenges in isolation. Your inner strength surpasses your awareness. You possess the capacity to overcome your circumstances. I am Emily, and what I've shared is the chronicle of how I fundamentally altered my life's direction.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening to my story today. Looking back on my journey, I realized that every challenge, every tear has its own meaning. Pain does not define who we are, but how we overcome it does. The message I want to share with you today is simple. No darkness lasts forever. No matter what you're facing, no matter how alone you feel, remember that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes that light comes from the strength within you, the strength you never knew you had. Each of us has the ability to rise above adversity and build a better life. Never give up hope, because hope is what guides us through the darkest times. If my story resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to the Grandparents Memories channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories. Please hit the like button to support the channel and help stories like this reach more people. I also want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the founder of Grandparents Memories for inviting me to share my story here. Thanks to this platform, our experiences can touch hearts and possibly change the lives of those who need it. See you again in the next stories on Grandparents Memories. Every story is a journey, and I believe that within each journey, there are valuable lessons worth sharing. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.